I wasn't looking for love. I wasn't chasing forever. I was just walking through life, quiet, steady, pretending I had everything under control. But then I realized something. Some nights feel heavier without your voice. Some victories feel empty without your smile, and some silences are too loud when you're not there. This isn't a dramatic confession. This isn't a perfect speech. It's just the truth, spoken slowly. I realized I don't just want you in my life. I need you in it. I used to believe that strength was something you carried alone, that if you could stand without leaning on anyone, you were doing life the right way. I taught myself how to be self-sufficient, how to handle silence, how to keep moving even when things felt heavy. I learned how to nod instead of explain, how to smile instead of ask, how to walk away instead of wait. For a long time, that version of strength felt clean and controlled. It felt safe. No expectations, no disappointment, no risk of needing more than I could give myself. I watched people rely on each other and told myself that wasn't for me. I called it freedom. I called it discipline. I convinced myself that depending on someone meant losing something, like giving away a piece of your balance. I thought independence meant not letting anyone see where you were vulnerable. So I became very good at hiding it, even from myself, especially from myself. But strength has a way of revealing its cracks over time, not all at once, not dramatically, just enough to make you question the story you've been telling yourself. It shows up when you're tired of being the only one holding things together, when the weight you've been carrying quietly starts to feel heavier than it should. When you realize that being strong all the time leaves no room to be human. I started noticing how often I was choosing distance without asking why, how often I was turning away from connection out of habit, not necessity. I wasn't protecting myself anymore. I was isolating myself. And I didn't call it loneliness, because that word felt too honest. I called it being focused, being driven, being fine. But fine has a way of becoming empty when you sit with it long enough. Then you entered my life in a way that didn't challenge my strength, but gently questioned it. You didn't ask me to drop my guard. You didn't ask me to change. You simply existed, steady and present, and somehow that made my defenses feel unnecessary. Around you, I didn't feel weaker. I felt lighter. And that confused me, because I had always believed those two things were the same. I realized that real strength isn't about refusing help. It's about knowing when you don't have to do everything alone. It's about allowing someone to stand beside you without feeling like you're losing your footing. With you, I didn't feel dependent. I felt supported. There's a difference. One takes away from you, the other adds to you. I began to understand that strength doesn't disappear when you admit you need someone. It changes shape. It becomes quieter, more grounded. Less about proving something and more about being honest. I didn't have to perform resilience around you. I didn't have to pretend I had all the answers. I could pause, I could breathe, I could exist without constantly holding myself together. That's when it hit me that my old definition of strength was incomplete. It was rigid. It left no space for connection. It demanded that I be solid at all times, even when I wasn't. And no one is. Not really. We just get good at acting like we are. I'd built an identity around being unshakable, but I hadn't asked myself who I was when I finally allowed myself to be open. You didn't make me weak. You showed me where I was strong enough to be honest, strong enough to say that some days are harder than others, strong enough to admit that sharing the weight doesn't mean dropping it. It means carrying it differently, together. And that kind of strength feels deeper than anything I knew before. I think the hardest part was letting go of the idea that I had to earn connection by being invulnerable, that I had to be complete before letting someone close. But completeness isn't the absence of need. It's the awareness of it. And I became aware of how much I had been denying myself by holding on to an outdated idea of what strength looks like. There's courage in standing alone, but there's also courage in reaching out, in allowing someone to matter, in admitting that Ife isn't meant to be navigated in isolation. I didn't lose myself when I stopped standing alone. I found parts of myself that had been waiting for permission to exist. Parts that didn't need to be armored, parts that didn't need to be silent. Now when I think about strength, I don't see a wall anymore. I see balance. I see trust. I see the quiet confidence of knowing that you don't have to face everything by yourself to be capable. I see the understanding that leaning on someone doesn't mean you'll fall. Sometimes it's what keeps you standing. And in realizing all of this, I also realized something else, that needing you doesn't undo who I am. It aligns me with who I'm becoming. It strips away the unnecessary weight I was carrying in the name of independence. It reminds me that strength isn't measured by how much you endure alone, but by how honestly you allow yourself to live. I didn't expect someone's presence to change the way my inner world works. I thought people came and went, added moments, memories, conversations, but never truly touched the core of how you think and feel. I believed that part of me was fixed, quiet, self-contained. I had my routines, my thoughts, my way of processing the world, and I assumed that was all there was. Then you showed up, and slowly, almost without permission, things began to shift. It wasn't obvious at first. There was no clear line between before and after, just small changes that were easy to ignore. My thoughts lingered longer, my tension softened. Silence didn't feel as empty anymore. I noticed that when you were around, or even when I thought about you, my mind slowed down, not in a tired way, but in a grounded way, like something inside me finally stopped running. I realized my inner conversations were changing. I wasn't as harsh with myself. I wasn't as distant. There was more patience in my thoughts, more understanding. I started questioning things I used to accept without reflection. Why I rush, why I hide, why I keep certain doors closed even when there's no danger on the other side. You didn't ask these questions out loud, but your presence made them unavoidable. Somehow, you became part of my mental landscape, not as a distraction, but as a reference point. When something felt heavy, I thought of how you would listen. When something felt good, I imagined sharing it with you. My inner world, which used to be a closed room, started to feel like a space that could be shared, even if only in thought. That scared me at first because it meant I was letting someone matter in places I had always guarded. I noticed how my emotions began to surface more honestly. I wasn't burying them as quickly. I wasn't dismissing them as weakness. I allowed myself to feel things fully because I knew there was someone who wouldn't turn away from that truth. Even when you weren't physically there, the idea of you made honesty feel safer. And that's not something I planned. It just happened. You didn't change me by owing something extraordinary. You changed me by being consistent, by being present without pressure, by listening without trying to fix. That kind of presence reaches places advice never can. It settles into your thoughts, rewrites old patterns, reshapes how you see yourself when no one else is watching. I began to understand that my inner world wasn't meant to be carried alone, that thoughts grow clearer when they're allowed to exist without judgment, that emotions don't become weaker when they're acknowledged, they become manageable. With you, I didn't feel the need to perform strength in my own head. I didn't have to narrate my life like I was convincing myself everything was fine. I could just be still. There were moments when I caught myself smiling for no reason, moments when the weight I usually carry felt lighter without explanation. And every time I traced it back, it led to you. Not to something you said or did in that moment, but to what you had already changed inside me. The way I process the world. The way I allow myself to care. I used to think my inner world was something no one could touch. That it was mine alone to manage, to protect, to survive inside. But you showed me that someone can enter that space without disrupting it, without taking anything away. You didn't invade it. You complemented it. You made it quieter where it was loud, warmer where it was cold. Now, even when things are uncertain, my thoughts don't spiral the way they used to. There's a sense of grounding I didn't have before. A reminder that I'm not navigating everything in isolation. That being understood, even partially, changes how deeply you understand yourself. And that kind of change doesn't announce itself. It simply becomes part of who you are. I used to think honesty with myself was easy. I told myself that whatever I felt, I already knew it, already understood it, already had it under control. I thought awareness was the same as acceptance. But there's a difference between knowing something and allowing it to be true. I spent a lot of time standing in that space, aware but guarded, close to the truth but never fully stepping into it. There were feelings I noticed and immediately pushed aside, not because they were unclear, but because they were inconvenient. They didn't fit the version of myself I was committed to being: calm, unaffected, in control. Admitting certain emotions felt like giving up ground. It felt like losing the balance I'd worked so hard to maintain, so I labeled them as temporary, or unnecessary, or something that would pass if I ignored it long enough. Pride played a quiet role in that. Not the loud kind, but the subtle kind that convinces you that you don't need to explain yourself, that you don't need to want too much, that needing something means you failed to manage your life properly. I didn't call it pride, I called it self-respect. I called it discipline, but in reality it was fear dressed up as control. The truth kept earning anyway, in moments I couldn't predict, in reactions I didn't expect, in the way my thoughts drifted back to you even when I tried to focus elsewhere. I could feel the honesty rising, pressing against the walls I had built, asking to be acknowledged. And every time I resisted it, the resistance cost me more energy than the truth ever would have. I realized that fear wasn't about what I felt, it was about what admitting it would change. Once you accept something, you're responsible for it. You can't pretend it doesn't exist anymore. You can't hide behind uncertainty. Accepting emotional truth means accepting that you might have to act differently, think differently, let go of certain defenses. And then that's uncomfortable, especially when you've built your identity around not needing much from anyone. But slowly I understood that avoiding the truth wasn't protecting me, it was exhausting me. Carrying unspoken feelings takes more strength than admitting them. Denial requires constant effort. Honesty, once you allow it, actually creates space. It doesn't weaken you, it steadies you. It gives your emotions somewhere to exist instead of forcing them to fight for attention. Letting go of pride didn't mean losing dignity, it meant redefining it. Dignity isn't pretending you're unaffected, it's having the courage to acknowledge what matters to you without apology, without justification, without turning it into a weakness. I didn't need to explain my feelings to make them valid. I just needed to stop arguing with myself about whether I was allowed to have them. When I finally accepted what I felt, there was a strange calm that followed. Not relief exactly, more like alignment. My thoughts stopped contradicting each other. My actions made more sense. I wasn't torn between what I wanted and what I thought I should want. The conflict eased not because the situation changed, but because I stopped lying to myself about it. Fear didn't disappear, but it lost its authority. It no longer decided what I was allowed to feel. It became something I noticed, not something I obeyed. And pride softened into something healthier, something quieter, a respect for myself that didn't require denial, a confidence that came from clarity, not control. Accepting emotional truth didn't make life simpler, but it made it real. It allowed me to stand in my own feelings without flinching, to recognize that vulnerability isn't the opposite of strength. It's a part of it. And once I stopped running from that, I realized I had been strong enough all along to face what was true. Choosing connection as a conscious decision isn't always obvious. It isn't a moment of grand revelation or dramatic declaration. It's quiet, deliberate, and sometimes uncomfortable. It's the decision to let someone matter in your life even when past experiences tell you to keep distance. It's the choice to stay open, to show up, to allow yourself to feel without guarantee of how things will unfold. It's realizing that connection requires vulnerability, and vulnerability requires trust, even if trust feels risky. I noticed how often I had avoided connection, convincing myself that solitude was safer, that independence was the only measure of strength. I told myself I didn't need anyone else, that relying on others was dangerous, that opening up meant risking disappointment or pain. And for a long time that worked. I could go through life without asking for anything, without depending on anyone, without letting anyone get close enough to matter. But it also made life quieter, lonelier, flatter. The edges weren't sharp, but neither were they alive. Then slowly, I realized that choosing connection doesn't erase your self-reliance. It doesn't weaken you. It doesn't make you less capable. It simply adds another layer to how you experience the world. It brings depth to moments that would otherwise pass unnoticed. It allows joy to be shared, fear to be softened, and silence to feel full rather than empty. Connection isn't a replacement for independence, it's an extension of it. It's a choice to balance strength with openness, to let life's experiences resonate more deeply. Choosing connection also means being honest about what matters to you. It means noticing the people who affect your thoughts, your moods, your sense of calm, and letting them in, even if it feels uncertain. It means acknowledging that someone else's presence can shift your inner world, can change how you move through. Each day can make ordinary things feel meaningful. And once you accept that, you can't unsee it. You can't ignore it. You start making choices that reflect it, consciously and consistently. It's not always easy. There are times when connection feels risky. when vulnerability seems like exposure, when stepping forward feels like stepping off a cliff. But in those moments, the choice to stay connected becomes an act of courage. You choose to value relationship over isolation, empathy over indifference, understanding over assumption. You choose to invest your attention, your patience, your care, knowing that connection may not always be reciprocated exactly as you hope. But the act itself, the willingness to be present and engaged, is transformative. I realized that choosing connection also changes the way I see myself. I start noticing that I am capable of empathy I didn't fully acknowledge, patience I hadn't exercised, and love that isn't conditional on perfection. By consciously deciding to connect, I discover that I can hold space for another person while still holding space for myself. I can remain grounded, secure, and true to my values while opening my heart. Connection doesn't demand that I lose myself, it allows me to be more fully myself. And once you embrace that choice, it affects everything. Conversations become more honest, silences feel less empty, moments of joy are amplified, and moments of struggle are shared rather than carried alone. Life becomes less about enduring and more about participating. It becomes less about observing and more about engaging. Choosing connection is not just about someone else, it's about transforming the way you experience your own existence. It's a decision to let life flow through interaction, through shared experience, through presence. Connection also teaches patience. It teaches that people, like circumstances, are not always predictable, that closeness may require compromise, empathy, and resilience, that allowing someone to matter means giving them the space to be imperfect while still valuing them fully. And in that patience, you discover your own capacity to grow, adapt, and love more deeply than you thought possible. Connection demands awareness, and that awareness brings clarity. Through it all, choosing connection becomes a conscious rhythm, a deliberate pattern of openness. It is noticing when to reach out, when to listen, when to give space, when to step forward. It's learning to honor boundaries, both yours and others, while refusing to let fear dictate how much you allow yourself to care. It is the understanding that connection isn't accidental. It is nurtured, maintained, and sustained by intention. And with intention, it becomes meaningful, resilient, and life-changing. Ultimately, choosing connection is choosing life in its fullest sense. It is the acknowledgement that we are not islands, that the world is not meant to be experienced alone. It is an embrace of vulnerability as a sea of strength. It is understanding that when you allow someone to matter, you also allow yourself to matter more fully. It is a quiet but profound decision to step into the spaces where real life happens, where emotion is honored, and where presence is more powerful than pretense. It is realizing that connection, once chosen consciously, becomes the thread that weaves your world together in ways that solitude alone never could.